You have your topic for your Rogerian research paper. You are either going to be writing about wolves in Wisconsin or about universal health care in the USA. So the first thing you'll need to do is to find some sources, and pretty much immediately after you get those sources, you'll need to start taking notes on them so that you can synthesize them into a paper to support your points. So here's some quick guidelines for taking notes. When you're reading your sources, you need to read each source with the source's own potential bias in mind. If it's a newspaper, is this a left-leaning newspaper or a right-leaning newspaper? Is this an opinion piece in a newspaper, or is it a reported, fact-checked article? If you're reading something from a scholarly journal, of course, that's going to be the top-level source, and a trade magazine is going to be the next level source. If you're reading something on the web, what is the URL? So make sure you know about the source's own potential bias as you're reading it so that you can weigh its credibility and what it's saying about your topic. You should also read each source with the problem statement, the controversial issue, in mind. So you know you're going to be writing about whether or not wolves should be on the endangered species list in Wisconsin. Read your sources with that in mind. Or you know you're going to be writing about the pros and cons of universal health care in the U.S. Read your sources with that information in mind. You should also read each source with how it relates to other sources in mind. You're creating a paper that combines these sources. So if you see two sources that agree, keep that in mind as you're taking notes. You can put them in the same paragraph in your paper. If you see two sources that disagree, keep that in mind because you can put them together in the paper and indicate that they disagree with a transition word like however or on the other hand. You should also read each source with how it relates to your own opinion in mind. You are writing this paper and it is persuasive, so you'll have some of your own thoughts and beliefs in the paper without necessarily using the word I, because it is a formal academic paper. But you should go into your sources with something in your head. Don't just read them cold. Otherwise, you'll find it hard to figure out what to take notes on. How do you take your notes? You figure out what works best for you. Some people like taking their notes on note cards. Note cards are nice because you can then rearrange them and sort them into piles so that you kind of visually can see what's going to go in each paragraph of your paper. I've always used notebook paper. On notebook paper, I'll just put a brief reminder of what the source is at the top of a page, and I'll take all my notes from that one source on that one page. That's always worked for me. It's not the best for synthesizing information because you really don't want to talk all about one source and then talk all about another source in your paper. You want to show how those sources interweave. Still, this is the method I've personally always used. Some people like to take notes on their computer. Some people like to open up a source on the screen and then have their Word document on the next screen and be taking notes. And that works great as well. Just make sure that you're paraphrasing correctly. You're changing both the structure and the words, and that you're looking away from the source to do that paraphrasing. Your notes should be things like statistics or a summary of an article. Maybe you've got a research study and you're going to include what that research study discovered about wolves or the conclusions it came to about universal health care. So it could just be one summary of an entire article. Maybe a paraphrase, a section in that article that you want to, 2 sentences or so that you would like to put in your own words and structure. Or your note could be a quotation. So in general, notes are quotations, paraphrases, summaries, or statistics. You quote things that are particularly beautiful or eloquent. You couldn't really state them in a different way, or that maybe someone said, so it's like part of an interview and you want to say what they said word for word. You should keep track of your sources somehow and also the page number that you got your statistic, paraphrase, or quote from. If it's a summary, obviously there's no page number because it's a summary of the whole. If you're looking at something that's on the web, you are to count the paragraph number. So you don't need to keep track of page numbers, but you'd count the paragraph number. If it's on the web and it's something that's in a list like this, then you wouldn't need to count anything. So that's just if you were reading an article online that didn't have any page numbers, but did have paragraphs. You should organize your notes, and this part really is key. And you can do this in your head or you can actually write it down. If you're using note cards, you can give each note card a title that indicates how these notes relate to one another, because you're going to be synthesizing them or putting them together in the paper. So you could have, pros of having wolves on the endangered species list, cons of having them on it, pros of having them off it, cons of having them off it. The pros of having universal health care, the cons of having universal health care. But you might have those pros and cons broken down into little mini subtopics. So, you might have the the cons of healthcare in terms of the type of care that you get. Or you might have something that's related to finances, the cost of care. So these titles will help you to organize your notes in the paper. And just throw out sources that aren't useful. You may have put some sources on your working bibliography that you plan to use, and later you read them and you're not going to use anything from them. That's fine. Just get rid of them and find new sources. One just quick tip on scholarly articles, because you are required to have one article from a peer-reviewed journal in this paper. So in EBSCO, there are all of the PDFs are images of actual print magazine journal articles, and the PDFs have page numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We don't want that page number. We want the actual journal number. So at the bottom of the journal page, there's usually a pretty high number because these journals are big and they continue pagination with each issue. So you would want that page number and not the number of the PDF. Just a small thing, but that will be helpful to the reader. Okay, so you'll need to begin taking notes, and then you'll also need to be thinking about writing the paper, and a big part of the rubric for this paper is synthesizing your sources. So let's take a look at that. Sorry, I've got my screencaster screen showing there. Here we go. And this section of the video will also help you with this week's discussion points. So we don't have the traditional discussion board. You will be writing a paragraph collaboratively with a partner or partners that's set up on Blackboard, exemplifying your ability to synthesize information and using some of your sources on the research paper topics, and hopefully writing this paragraph will help you with the paper, because you'll understand what synthesis is. You will get ideas from your partners about sources that you can use. So when you synthesize information, you're putting information together to support a point. When you make the decision of whether or not to go see a movie, you might watch a trailer, you might read a review, you might ask your friends who have seen it, you might consider who's in the movie. That's 4 different places that you're getting information from, and you're synthesizing them together to decide, yes, I'm going to go see it, or no, I'm not going to go see it. Well, this is the same thing that we're going to do in this paper. You're deciding, whether wolves should be on the endangered species list or whether they shouldn't. You're deciding whether the U.S. should have universal health care or whether it shouldn't. And then you will be getting source information and putting it all together to support your ultimate point. Here's a paragraph that uses synthesis. Pause the video for a moment and read through the paragraph, and just know that I've highlighted the sentences or color-coded the sentences to sort of show the synthesis, which I'll explain when you're finished reading. Okay, so anything that's in purple is the writer's own words. The topic sentence is in purple, and the explanation of the source material, which is very, very important, is in purple. That's all the writer's own words. The source material I put in blue and green. So they had 2 sources here, Santiago and Hayakawa. They used a transition word, the transition word however, to show that these sources are actually oppositional. They're offering 2 different views of how to teach recent immigrants. Without that transition word, the paragraph would be tougher on the reader. I would have to figure out on my own that they were oppositional, or I would have to wait for this discussion here at the bottom to figure that out. So just with that one word, it already tells me how these sources relate. So the transition word is a huge part of synthesis. Using more than one source, using a transition word to show how sources relate, and making sure that the sources don't take over. You still need your topic sentence. You still need your concluding sentence. You still need to explain to the reader what those sources mean. So most of the paragraph should be purple. It should be your own thoughts. That's what makes synthesis. Here's another example. The color coding's the same, so go ahead and pause the video for a moment and read the paragraph and think about how this person is synthesizing information from multiple sources. So this person used 3 sources. One is in blue, one is in green, and then they also did an interview. So they did some primary research, and that's in red. And note that this paragraph is a little light on the purple. I would never end your paragraph with source material. I think this person did because it was a quotation and it was particularly powerful and they felt it could stand on its own. But throughout a paper or a long document, if you keep ending paragraphs on source material, The reader has to do all this work in his or her own mind to figure out what that source material means. So you really want to end with a concluding sentence that draws all the sources together. This person used one transition word, in fact. So this person was clarifying what was said in the previous source, and they put 3 sources together. So again, synthesis, using multiple sources, using transition words to show how they relate, and making sure your sources don't take over. Most of the paragraph should still be your thoughts, your opinion about the topic. So here it is in sum. When you write a paragraph for the body of your Rogerian report, or this next discussion board assignment, decide on a main point and state it in one sentence. Look for evidence from more than one source to support your points. Use transition words to show how the sources relate. Your book does have one chart of transition words on pages A3, plus you have the document that I put on Blackboard. Then you need to drive your point home with an explanation of the source material, your own thoughts, feelings, or opinions. This doesn't necessarily mean you're using I. It just means you're taking a moment to state the source material in a new way and really explain how this source material supports the topic sentence. Remember that your notes are summaries, paraphrases, and quotations. And remember that you need to ease us into your source material. So you do that by using a signal phrase like, as Smith states, or according to the article such and such. For credibility, if you mention someone's name, you should say who they are. As Smith, professor of biology at Harvard, states, then I realize who this person is. Put in the summary, quotation, or paraphrase, and then you can use parenthetical citation, which we'll go over in detail later on, right after the summary, quotation, or paraphrase. And for the style that we're going to use, we'll use the last name, comma, the year, comma, and then a P period and the number for the page number. But again, don't worry too much about that now because we'll go over it in detail later and you'll be reading about it in the book. For now, work more on the flow of your paragraph, writing a good synthesis paragraph that uses more than one source, a transition word to show how the sources relate, and your own topic sentence and concluding sentence that bring all of the sources together. So this is what you'll be doing for this week's discussion board. Instead of a discussion board, I would like you to write a paragraph about your research paper topic. The topics are either wolves in Wisconsin or universal health care for the USA. Write this paragraph in OneDrive collaboratively with your partner or partners. The partners were assigned in class, and I've also listed them again on Blackboard. So one of you just needs to start the document and share it with the other person, and then you can work on it throughout the week. In your paragraph, synthesize information from at least 2 sources to support your opinion on the topic, and use transition words to show how the sources and your own explanations and experience or knowledge relate. Make sure your paragraph is unified and coherent, that it has a topic sentence, that you're using those transition words, and that was all explained in the other video. You can make changes and additions by actually editing the document like we did in class this week with the business letter, but use the comment function to indicate what you have changed because you might not be on OneDrive at the same time and I won't be on there while you're working on it. So I won't really know if one person wrote the whole paragraph or if 2 people actually did work on it. So use that comment function to say, hey, I added such and such, or do you think we need this, or I changed the topic sentence to this, but you can change it back if you want. That way I'll know that you were collaborating on it throughout the week. And just have it ready before Tuesday's class, and we'll look at a few of them in class. You won't be writing your research papers together, but you'll be sharing sources, and you may be able to incorporate this paragraph into your research paper. So I think it'll be a big help on getting it started. Please email me if you have any questions.